who at that time, back in the 60s and 70s, was an aerospace firm. The second generation of BART car was fabricated by a French firm. His name is Sofaval. And the third generation of BART car is we're looking to acquire a manufacturer for those cars at this very moment. We also have quite a bit of what is called direct fixation rail. So the rail is tied directly to a concrete slab, and you get extreme accuracy of alignment, very good wear patterns, and able to run very high speeds without distortion in the alignment of the rail for that kind of construction. Our fare collection system, much like our cars, does not require any human intervention other than the user. And we have ticket vending machines where you purchase a ticket for any denomination that you need, from a single ride to a multi-ride ticket. And then the ticket gate itself will read a magnetic strip, which will essentially tell the ticket collection system how much value is on the ticket. It'll read port of entry and point of exit. It will deduct the exact correct amount for that particular trip, and then print the remaining value. When the ticket value is consumed, or close to be consumed, you can actually add fare or add fare capability or travel capability to that ticket in an add fare machine. We have 4 shops throughout the system, and the shops are established so that they can do all the maintenance required, both daily, we call running maintenance work, as well as campaign work and some overhaul work. Each shop is established so that it can support the fleet of cars assigned to it. One of the major new programs that BART has embarked on is a very extensive rehabilitation of its current assets. After handling about 1 billion passengers, the cars have run over 1 million miles apiece. It's time for us to think about and act on a reinvestment program that stabilizes and preserves our ability to carry people reliably, safely, and economically long into the future. We expect to expand the BART network by 50% between now and the year 2000. I'd say mass transit systems are a tremendous option for cities today. When you have density, when you have the need to manage growth or to stimulate growth in a proper fashion, rail presents a very, very attractive alternative to the traditional means of seeing American cities grow, which is by way of highway travel.
You know, once a piece of railroad equipment has lost its usefulness, most railroads either sell the units or scrap them. But not the Union Pacific. It has taken a preservationist attitude. They have restored and preserved some of the finest examples of locomotive power for posterity. Steve Lee is in charge of their program.
Well, the steam program on the UP is basically a public relations program that's secondary purpose is to run excursions. I operate the steam end of it. I manage the locomotive fleet, the steam locomotive fleet, and the support cars that go with it, and I do all the planning and advance work for the excursions. The passenger equipment and the paperwork and legal work are all handled out of Omaha. The passenger equipment itself is maintained in the shop there, and it's cleaned and supplied and made ready for trips there. The intent of the steam program was to keep one locomotive in operation on rare occasions for special events and for historical purposes. That started in 1960 after the railroad had dieselized in 1959. But since that time, the program has grown to a considerable extent. We've added more equipment and we operate quite a bit more often. But it started out with a very noble purpose, and we try to keep it that way. Well, the steam program itself encompasses about 50 to 60 pieces of equipment if you count the passenger cars. Union Pacific still maintains a passenger car fleet of 42 cars. 844 was the last steam locomotive that the Union Pacific bought brand new. They bought it in December 1944, and it was delivered right after Christmas in 1944. It's the longest continuously operating steam engine operating in the country right now. As I say, it's never been retired. It's been active every year that since it's been built. The 3985 was a freight locomotive. It's actually a year older than 844. It was built in 1943. It last ran in regular service in 1957. Union Pacific developed the Challenger type and owned more of them than any other railroad, and it kept 2 of them when steam locomotives were being scrapped. And in 1979, a group of employees volunteered to restore the locomotive and convinced the railroad to let them work on it in their spare time and weekends and like that. They donated all their labor and materials, and 2 years later they had the locomotive running again. It is right now the largest operating steam locomotive in the world. Once you've planned the maintenance on one of these, you can see why they got rid of them. Steam locomotives are extremely maintenance intensive. The boiler requires maintenance on a monthly basis. It requires water treatment on a daily basis. The running gear requires almost constant attention because there's the giant mass of moving parts, and there's so many moving parts. Every time she turns a wheel revolution, it takes a little bit out of them. And it's not hard to see why, back in steam locomotive days, when Cheyenne was a full-fledged shop and roundhouse, it took 5,000 employees at this location alone to maintain steam locomotives. The diesels we have consist of a total of 4 locomotives. 3 of them are E9 passenger units. They're 2A units. Those are locomotives with cabs, and a B unit, which is a locomotive that doesn't have a cab. They were built in 1954, and they're representative of the fleet of diesels that replaced steam locomotives on the streamliners back in the late 40s and early 50s. The other diesel that we have in the fleet is the 6936. That was the largest diesel locomotive ever built. It's also still serviceable and used on passenger equipment from time to time. Some of the rest of the equipment in the fleet includes the 2 water cars that we use with the steam engines to extend the range on trips. We have a couple of tool cars that we carry supplies and parts and tools for the steam locomotives, because once you leave here, there's no way to maintain a locomotive unless you take everything with you. We are also responsible for the remaining rotary snowplows on the Union Pacific. The UP has 3 of them, and of course they are the heavy artillery when we have snow. Well, I started my railroad career 21 years ago as a locomotive fireman and then a locomotive engineer. Of course, by then everything was diesel. I came to Cheyenne in 1980, and of course, 844 just happened to be based here, and the restoration project on 3985 was also going on when my job at that time was road foreman of engines, and the fellow that I was working with had started his UP career in 1941 on steam. He had been here before both of those locomotives were built. He was a very experienced man, a very reliable individual, and he kind of took me under his wing. He realized that when he retired, there would be no one else to carry this on without educating someone else. So I got the benefit of a one-on-one tutor relationship from some very experienced and very well-versed individuals. And since then, I've had to pick up a lot of it on my own. And it's running a steam locomotive is similar to running a diesel in that every trip you learn something.
The Union Pacific also maintains an extensive fleet of passenger cars from the 1950s. On a smaller scale, however, but massive nonetheless, is the Pasadena Model Railroad Club, one of the oldest model railroad clubs in America. It has survived a major fire and been rebuilt in a former bowling alley.
The club layout, the physical plan of the layout is 72 by 70 feet, surrounded by an 8-foot aisle, and we're located in an industrial building in Los Angeles. We renovated the whole building and made the layout that you see here today. We have 1,700 feet of main line and probably 30,000 feet of rail. That's not counting sidings and all the yards and so forth. The average time for a passenger train is very close to an hour. Freight trains would take longer. Usually the easiest way to go is from A to Z. That's the way the layout's laid out. And A is Alhambra, which is the largest yard in the whole layout. And then it would move through the 4-track main line through Bend into Colton, which is our industrial area. We have all kinds of meat packing plant, oil industries. And then we move on to Delta and into Echo, which the trolley line terminates at that point. And then it keeps on going in through what we call the Valley District to Midway, which is the median point of our railroad, and it's also
where helpers are applied to trains that are too heavy to make the 2% grade up the mountain district. The train then leaves Midway and heads up fairly stiff grade into Powderhorn, and the helpers are then removed from that at that point. Just a note about Powderhorn, it's a resort area. It started out as a railroad town, but like the UP made Sun Valley into a resort area to draw traffic, same thing happens here. So, but then we continue on into the next station would be Red Cliff, which is the highest point on the railroad. Troy is a major yard along the line. It provides the area with cement. It's the place where lumber is collected from the mill from the logging area. And then we go on down into Vista, which is the place where coal cars are marshaled into mainline trains. We come on into Whiskey and then into Zion, which is the port of our railroad, the westernmost point of the railroad. This actually is a point-to-point railroad. We do not go around again. There's two dispatcher panels. One controls the traffic on the east side of the railroad. The other controls traffic on the west side of the railroad. Each cab handles a train over the entire railroad. He controls not only the speed of the train, but the turnouts that the train passes over. His blocks are given to him verbally by dispatcher, and he turns them on physically. Club definitely has equipment standards, which we rely on heavily for keeping everything on the rails and having our operation run smoothly here. Basically, it's NMRA standards, and we just hold very strictly to those. The weights of the cars, the rollability, we have a requirement that each car must roll on a 2% grade freely. We have a way of rating our locomotives that we can tell how many units or cars the locomotive would be able to pull up our grade. We have a ruling grade of 1.5%, but we do have a segment of track that's 2%, and we need to know how many cars those locomotives will pull so they don't stall on the railroad. The structure that impresses me most is our steel plant. It's an amazing structure. It's an entire thing that probably occupies about 14 feet, and it's got the burners and all of the buildings that are required there. So we have the petroleum plant, a refinery plant, and those are located at Gary and at Colton. The control tower at Alhambra is an exact replica of the Barstow Tower that Santa Fe has out at Barstow. The roundhouse at Aztec, it serves both ends of the railroad, is a real large structure, and it's real neat. Our future plans are completing the work that's in progress now. We have 3 branch lines, none of which are totally complete. The one that's nearest completion is the coal branch. The second one that will be coming up will be the logging branch, and then the third one will be the ore branch, which supplies ore for the steel mill and all the other industries on the railroad. I strongly doubt that Sierra Pacific will ever be completed.
Kennebunkport, Maine is home to the Seashore Trolley Museum, which has the largest examples of trolley and interurban rail vehicles seen anywhere. Senior correspondent Chuck Zahner tells us more.
At the Seashore Trolley Museum, Kennebunkport, Maine, one could literally ride into yesterday aboard an antique trolley or interurban car. And next to me is the museum's director, Don Curry, and the museum's public relations director, Jan Pillsbury. Don, how did it all begin at the museum?
Way back in 1939, open cars were rapidly becoming a thing of the past, and some of our members went up to ride the Biddeford and Saco Railroad around the July 4th weekend, and they heard that the buses had been ordered and that old number 31, which is the car that they were riding on a fan trip, was about to be junked. And of course they didn't want that to happen. Now, they were 8 fellows from Harvard University and from the Boston area, and their funds were small, but they did go over, I think it had a lot of courage, to the owner of the Biddeford and Saco Railway and asked him if they could buy one of his trolleys. And they negotiated with him and came up with a figure of about $150, with which they bought the first car, old number 31, which we call the mother car because it's the mother not only of all cars in our museum, but the mother of all the trolleys in any trolley museum anywhere, because it's the first one.
On a tour of the museum, what will you see?
Well, when you first come into the visitor center, you'll see an old copper collector's booth. And then when you go outside, the first thing you'll see in front of you will be the car waiting for you to take you for your ride out the old Atlantic Shoreline trolley line, which we have reconstructed over the last 52 years. And on that, you get the feeling, not only seeing, but the feeling of the sounds and the sights of the old trolley line. And then afterward, you can come back and go through the restoration shop and go through the exhibit barns where they have the better-looking trolleys that we've spent a lot of time and energy restoring.
Describe some of the interesting cars to us.
Some of the cars that are very popular in the summer are open cars. It's a great way to cool down, especially on hot summer days. You can get on the car. It's natural air conditioning. It's great. Also, the City of Manchester is a very interesting car. Don, why don't you tell about that?
The City of Manchester was a parlor car. Most of your trolley companies in the early days, when they had more money than they did at the end, built these parlor cars for the privilege of the executives riding around, and then they would also charter them for special parties to tour, to cool off, or to have parties, or to go to funerals or something like that. We got a real special tour car, which I think you kind of like, the one with all the steps in it.
Oh, yes, the Golden Chariot from Montreal. Tell about that.
The Golden Chariot is one of 4 tour cars that were used in Montreal to take people around the city, and it has steps like this. The seats, instead of being on a level, are arranged so that you can see over the person in front of you, and up on top it has an ornate carved Canadian beaver chewing on a maple leaf, which we think is kind of interesting. And then, of course, we have the more ordinary, at least to the trolley business, closed cars, city cars that were used during regular service. So we have everything from very old ones to the very most modern cars.
You have cars from all over the world, too, like the one that just came from Budapest.
Budapest to Boston, London to Los Angeles, and Nagasaki to New York. Cars that you'd see from all over the world.
Tell us about the museum's restoration program.
When we get trolleys, naturally they're not in pristine condition because either they have been run to the last mile or else they have been used for other things besides trolleys. In fact, many of them have not been trolley cars running the streets for longer than they were trolleys. And so we get them in a condition that is in need of restoration or rehabilitation, which may involve taking the body completely apart and using it as sort of a prototype by which we build the new one. We'll put on new roofs, new floors, new sides, new windows, and we try to be as authentic as we can, both in terms of materials and in methods. Our job is not to improve on history, but take the best of what we find, and then we'll restore it to a period which we agree on after a lot of discussion. It might be original, as it was when it came out of the builders, but more likely it would be at a period of its best use, when it looked the best, but perhaps was not as it was originally.
What was the museum's most spectacular project?
I think moving Northampton Elevated Station by water from Boston is one which in any museum is probably the most spectacular. This is a 1900 copper-covered building which was given to us by the Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority, and then we were told to move it here. We tried to move it over the road. It was much too big, so we had to bring it to the beach in Kennebunkport by barge and then cut it in half, which involved a number of days of sawing in front of many, many tourists and so forth. It probably gave us more exposure than any other thing, too, in an area rather unlikely for that sort of thing. And then we moved it up the highway. Now it's sitting in front of our museum awaiting further plans, but it was just tremendously exciting to move it, to negotiate with the town, which really didn't want to see it, to negotiate with barge captains who were trying to work around the vagaries of tides and time and so forth, and the movers, the building movers and so forth. All were cooperative ultimately, but it was always that question, would we ever get it here or not? At one time, the town said, you can't bring that here at this time of the year. You're going to have to send it back. And that, of course, was not an option. And it's here, so obviously we prevailed.
Describe some of the cars to us.
Some of them come from operating systems, which, of course, our museum members know about. A lot of them come from secondary uses, and through a network of other museums and rail fans, we are notified all the time as to where they are. Our museum has gotten a reputation for saving these, and so they come to us oftentimes first because they know that it will get a good home here.
What does the future hold for the museum?
At the Seashore Trolley Museum, we try to be a place where the present meets the past. And when people come to the museum, we want them to experience with all five senses what it was like in the trolley era. So they go on an actual ride, and they sing the music, and they hear the music, and they see the sights and the smells and the taste of the trolley era.
Jan and Don, this has been absolutely fascinating here today.
Thanks for coming, Chuck, and we hope that this will encourage people from all over the country to see the world's largest and oldest trolley museum.
Great. For Tracks Ahead, this is Chuck Sainer.
An early pioneer in the model railroad hobby was Mantua Metal Products, whose early kits made quality miniature materials affordable and accessible for the average model railroader.
Mantua Metal Products has been a part of the model railroading hobby since 1930. The firm began as the Mantua Toy Company in 1926 when two friends, John Tyler and James Thomas, formed a partnership to build wood and metal sailboats. Tyler designed a good quality motor to power the boats. This motor was the forerunner of a smaller motor which was suitable for use in double O-gauge crane engines. Sales were brisk, and in 1933 the company moved to new quarters in Woodbury Heights, New Jersey. Mantua brought out a new DC motor in 1936, which was suitable for HO gauge and expanded into kits for freight cars and locomotives. By 1938, the word toy was dropped from the name, and the company became Mantua Metal Products. The firm's line contained everything one needed to get started in the model railroad hobby, and their HO automatic couplers were the earliest to gain wide acceptance. The company continued to grow with the first ready-to-run crane set sold in 1953. 4 years later, John Tyler decided to establish a separate company called Tyco to market a line of crane sets. Mantua was sold in 1970 to Consolidated Food, but was repurchased in 1977 by the Tyler family. Today, John Tyler's son, Norman, serves as chairman of the board.
Well, that's all we have for this chapter of Tracks Ahead. Please join me next time when we take a look at the color, all the excitement and history of America's continuing love affair with railroading.
Tracks Ahead is moving to a new day and time, beginning Sunday, February 13th. This program can be seen Sundays at 2:30 p.m. Provided in part by a grant from the Kalmbach Publishing Company, publishers of Model Railroader and other hobby magazines and books. And by William K. Walters Incorporated, a manufacturer and distributor of model railroad products, catalogs, and supplies, serving hobbyists and dealers worldwide since 1932. Order Tracks Ahead Layout, a home video collection from Tracks Ahead by calling 1-800-759-0960 or send $33.95 to Tracks Ahead, Box 09465, Milwaukee, Wisconsin 53209.
Presentation of Tracks Ahead is made possible in part